A weathered hand slammed an envelope onto the counter. The envelope tore. A second hand shoved it back across the wood, hard enough to skid. A voice cracked through the room. "Take it back." "I won't sign that." Another voice came back sharper. "You sign it or you're out by Friday." Boots scraped on the tile. A chair tipped over. An old man stood up, shaking, one hand on the table to steady himself. His other hand went to his chest. He looked across the table at her. His name was Walter Briggs. 78 years old. 42 years on a ranch he'd built himself. The woman demanding he sign it all away was his own daughter. What none of them knew was that the man they thought was broke had been testing them for 3 long years. What was he about to do next? Stay with me on this one. Now, to understand what just happened, you need to go back. 3 years before that envelope hit the counter, Mary Briggs was buried under a cottonwood tree on the back end of the ranch. She'd been Walter's wife for 51 years. The day they put her in the ground, all 4 of his children stood around the grave. They wore black. They held each other. They cried. And the next morning, every single one of them sat at his kitchen table and waited for him to tell them what came next. That kitchen had seen everything. Birthdays, branding days, Christmases, fights. Mary used to pour coffee from the same pot for 40 years. The pot was still there on the stove, half full and going cold. Walter looked at his 4 grown children. Daniel, the oldest, Karen, Marcus, and Sarah, the youngest. He took a breath and he lied to them. He told them the ranch was failing. The drought had wiped out 2 seasons of grass. The cattle prices were down. He'd taken out a second loan against the land. He didn't know how much longer he could hold on. Mary's medical bills had eaten through what was left in savings. None of that was true. Not a word. The ranch was paid off. The herd was thinned but healthy. The savings were untouched. And the trust Mary had asked him to set up, quietly, over the last decade, that was sitting at over $4 million. But that morning, Walter watched their faces. Now here's the thing about a man's children. You don't see who they are when the table is full. You see who they are when the table goes empty. Daniel was the first to speak. He cleared his throat and said the practical thing. He said, "Well, Dad, we should probably look at selling. Get out from under it. Take what we can." Daniel was a real estate developer in Denver. He'd already pulled out his phone, like a buyer was a text message away. Karen went next. She put a hand on Walter's wrist and said, "Daddy, maybe it's time you came to live with us. The ranch is too much. You shouldn't be out here alone." She had a quiver in her voice. She was good at that quiver. She'd been using it since she was 12. Marcus didn't say much. Marcus was the accountant. He looked at the table for a long time and then he said, "Whatever you decide, Dad. But I want to be clear. I can't be sending money out here. My kids are going to college. I have my own." Walter nodded. Then he looked at Sarah. Sarah was 36 years old. She taught 4th grade in a town 2 hours west. She was the only one of the 4 who didn't make a lot of money. Her husband had been killed in a car accident 4 years before Mary died. Sarah was raising 2 kids on a teacher's salary. Sarah didn't say anything about the ranch. She said, "Daddy, what do you need? Tell me what you need and I'll be here." That was the test. Right there at that kitchen table, the morning after they buried their mother. Walter never said a word about a test. But that morning was when it started. Over the next 3 years, Walter let the lie do its work. He started driving a truck that wheezed when he turned the key. He kept the porch light off. He stopped buying anything that didn't have a coupon next to it on the counter. When the kids called, he sounded tired. He sounded broke. He sounded like a man hanging on by a fingernail. Daniel called twice in those 3 years. Both times to talk about selling. Corinne called more often. Every call ended the same way. Dad, please come live with us. It's not safe out there. She mentioned a place in Phoenix. A retirement community. She had brochures. Marcus called once a year. On Christmas. Always short. Always a little too cheerful. Never a question about how Walter was actually doing. And Sarah. Sarah drove out every other weekend. 2 hours each way. 2 kids in the backseat. Groceries in the trunk. She'd walk in the kitchen, set the bags on the counter and start cooking. She fixed the porch railing the second weekend. She painted the back door the fourth. She brought her kids to feed the horses. She never once mentioned money. She just kept showing up. And Walter watched. And he waited. And up on the mantel in a small silver frame, Mary watched too. That photograph would matter later. That brings us to the day the envelope hit the counter. It had been 3 years and 2 weeks since Mary's funeral. It was a Tuesday morning. Walter was making coffee when he heard tires on the gravel. Corinne got out of a rental car. She had a leather portfolio under her arm. She wore a beige pantsuit. She looked like she'd come from a meeting. Walter opened the door before she knocked. "Daddy," she said, and she smiled the way she smiled in pictures. "I brought you something to look at. I think you're going to be relieved." She walked past him, set the portfolio on the kitchen table, took out a folder. Inside was a stack of papers and a pen with a gold barrel. "I've been talking to some people," she said. "Daniel and I both have. There's a development group out of Denver. They want to put a residential community on the South Pasture. They're offering a fair price. We can get you out of this house, into a nice place, and you'll never have to worry again." Walter looked at the papers. It wasn't a development deal. It was a deed transfer. Corinne wanted him to sign the ranch over to her, with power of attorney clauses underneath. She'd fill in the buyer later. He'd already be off the property. He pushed the folder back across the table. "Take it back. I won't sign that." Corinne's smile did something. It froze. Then it cracked at the edges. She leaned in. "You sign it or you're out by Friday." That's when the chair tipped. That's when his hand hit the table. That's when Walter Briggs stood up and felt his own daughter look at him like a problem she was tired of having. But here's where it turns. Walter didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just said very quietly, "You can leave now, Corinne." She gathered her things. She left the folder on the table on purpose. She said, "Think about it, Daddy. Daniel and Marcus and I have already discussed this. We're all on the same page. You don't want to be the one who fights us on this." She drove off. The dust didn't even have time to settle. Walter stood in his kitchen. He looked down at that pen with the gold barrel. He picked it up. He turned it over in his hand. Then he set it back down on the table very carefully, like it was something he didn't want to break. He walked to the mantel. He picked up the silver frame. Mary looked back at him from inside the glass. She'd been 47 when that picture was taken. Her hair was up. She was laughing at something he didn't remember. Walter said out loud, "You were right." He set the frame back down. He went to his desk. He pulled out a notebook. He wrote 3 things in it. Daniel, March. 2 days. Sold the south fence wire. Corinne, today. Brought a deed. Marcus, silence. He closed the notebook. The phone rang. It was Sarah. She said, "Daddy." Corinne's husband called me. She came to see you. Walter said she came. Sarah said I'm coming out. I'll be there tonight. Don't sign anything. Walter said I won't. She said I love you. He said I know, honey. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. He watched the afternoon light move across the floor. He didn't eat. He didn't drink anything. He just sat. Sarah arrived at 8:15. She came up the porch steps with a paper bag of groceries and a thermos of soup she'd made on the drive over. Her 2 kids were at her sister-in-law's for the weekend. She didn't say a word about Corinne. She didn't ask about the deed. She walked into the kitchen, set the bag on the counter and said, "Daddy, you eat yet?" Walter said no. Sarah heated the soup. She buttered bread. She set it in front of him. She sat down across from him, and she ate too. After dinner, she did the dishes. He told her not to. She did them anyway. When she was done, she dried her hands on the towel and said, "Want to sit on the porch? It's a nice night." They went out. The porch swing was where Mary always sat. The chains creaked when Sarah lowered herself into it. Walter sat in the rocker beside her. Sarah said, "I don't care what they're trying to do. You stay here as long as you want to stay here. If you need money, I'll figure it out. I'll get a second job. I'll move out here if I have to." Walter looked at her. He almost said it then. The whole thing. The lie. The trust. The $4 million. The test. He almost said, "Sarah, honey, listen." But he didn't. Because something in him still needed to see it through. Because the test wasn't over. Because something in him said, "Not yet." So instead, he reached over and put his hand over hers on the porch swing. Her hand was small. Warm. He said, "I'm all right, Sarah. Don't you worry." She said, "Okay, Daddy." They sat like that for an hour. For 1 hour in that house on that porch, the storm seemed to have passed. It hadn't. The next morning, 3 cars came up the drive at the same time. Walter was on the porch with his coffee. Sarah was in the kitchen. The first car was Daniel's rental from the airport. The second was Corinne's back again. The third was a black sedan Walter didn't recognize. A man in a suit got out of the back. Sarah came to the door and saw them and said, "What is this?" Walter said, "I don't know yet." But he had a guess. Daniel walked up the steps first. He didn't hug his father. He didn't say good morning. He looked at Sarah and said, "I didn't know you were going to be here." Sarah said, "I'm always here." Corinne came up next. She had her portfolio again. The man in the suit followed her. He had a briefcase and a tight little smile. "Dad," Daniel said, "we need to have a family meeting." "All of us?" Walter said, "Marcus isn't here." Corinne said, "Marcus is on the phone." She held up her cell phone. Marcus's voice came through the speaker. "Hey, Dad." This is where the story changed. Because what came out of that briefcase wasn't a deed. It was a petition. The man in the suit was a lawyer. His name was Pruitt. He worked for a firm in Denver that specialized in elder law. That's what he told them. Elder law. He said the words like he'd said them 1,000 times. What Pruitt put on the kitchen table was a petition for guardianship. A formal filing. If Walter wouldn't sign over the ranch on his own, the 3 older children were going to file it in court. They were going to claim he was no longer of sound mind. They were going to ask a judge to make them his legal guardians. Daniel, Corinne, and Marcus jointly. They would control the ranch. They would control his bank accounts. They would control where he lived and what he spent. Pruitt slid a copy across the table. "It's not a hostile filing," he said. It's a protective measure. We'd much rather your father sign the alternative document. The alternative document was the deed. Sarah read 3 lines of the petition, and her face went white. She looked at her older sister. "Karen," she said, "what is this?" Karen said, "Sarah, you don't live this. You don't see what we see. Daddy hasn't been the same since Mom died. He's making bad decisions. He's losing weight. The house is falling apart." Daniel said, "Sarah, stay out of it. You've always been the favorite. We get it. But this is real. This is for him." Marcus's voice came through the phone. "Sarah, listen. None of us want this. But Dad has to face facts. He can't be alone out here anymore." Sarah said, "Daddy, do you want me to call the sheriff?" Walter set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. He came inside. He looked at the 4 of them. 3 faces in the room. 1 on the phone. He said, "Henry." Sarah said, "What?" Walter said, "Sarah, get me Henry. The number is in the book by the phone. Tell him to bring everything." Henry was Walter's lawyer. Walter had used him for 40 years. Sarah went to the phone. Daniel said, "Dad, having your guy come out doesn't change anything. We've already filed." Walter said, "You haven't filed yet, Daniel. You'd have served me if you had. You're trying to scare me into signing." Daniel's mouth closed. Corinne said, "Daddy." Walter said, "Sit down. All of you. You're going to wait. And here's the moment I want you to feel." That was the moment Walter Briggs stopped being the man they thought he was. The broken man. The tired man. The widower running out of options. He set his cup down, and his shoulders came back up where they used to be when he was 40. He walked to the mantel. He picked up Mary's photograph in the silver frame. He looked at it for a few seconds. He set it back down. Then he sat at the head of the table, the way he'd sat for 50 years, and he waited. "Now look. If you're still riding with me on this one, hit that subscribe button. The next 40 minutes in that kitchen are why this story exists. There's more coming on this channel like you wouldn't believe." All right. Back to that kitchen. Henry pulled up 45 minutes later in a dusty Buick. He was 76 years old. He'd been Walter's lawyer since 1981. He carried 2 briefcases. 1 brown. 1 black. He walked into the kitchen and looked around like a man who'd already been told everything that was about to happen. Prude stood up. He said, "And you are?" Henry said, "Henry Caldwell, Walter's attorney." "Sit down." Prude sat down. Henry set the briefcases on the table. He opened the brown one first. He took out a folder. He set it in front of Walter. He said, "Walter, you sure?" Walter said, "I'm sure." Henry opened the folder. He turned it toward the children. Daniel looked. Corinne looked. Marcus's voice on the phone said, "What is it?" Corinne said, "Oh my God." The folder had bank statements, tax returns, trust documents, property records. The ranch was paid off. Free and clear. Had been for 19 years. The savings account had over $600,000 in it. The trust, the one Mary had asked him to build, had $4.1 million in it as of the last quarterly report. Walter Briggs was not a poor man. Walter Briggs had never been a poor man. Daniel sat down hard. He didn't make a sound. His mouth was open. Corinne looked at her father like she'd never seen him before in her life. Marcus's voice came through the phone. "Dad. Dad, what is this?" Walter looked at the phone. He said, "Marcus, This is what you've been listening to for 3 years. This is what was actually in the bank while you were telling me you couldn't send $100. Marcus said nothing. Walter pulled the second briefcase across the table. The black one. He opened it. Inside on top was a yellow legal notebook. Spiral bound. Worn at the edges from 3 years of being opened and closed. Walter took it out. He set it in front of him. He opened it to the first page. He started to read. He didn't raise his voice. He read like he was reading off a list. Daniel. April 14th, 3 years ago. Phone call. Asked about the price of land per acre. Asked twice. Asked again on May 2nd. Did not ask how I was sleeping. Daniel started to say something. Walter held up one hand without looking up. Daniel. October 3rd, 2 years ago. Came to the ranch. Stayed 40 minutes. Brought a real estate appraiser. Did not stay for dinner. Daniel. June. Last year. Phone call. Suggested I move to a smaller place. Asked about the deed. Did not ask about my back. Daniel looked at the floor. Walter turned the page. Karen. May 9th, 3 years ago. First mention of the retirement community. Sent a brochure 2 weeks later. Karen. November of that year. Came with her husband. Stayed 2 hours. Pricing assisted living. Left a folder. Did not eat the dinner I cooked. Karen. February. This year. Second deed proposal. The first one I burned. She doesn't know about that one. Karen put her face in her hands. Walter turned the page. Marcus. Calls on this list 3. All on Christmas. Length of longest call, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Visits to the ranch, none. Letters or cards beyond Christmas, none. Birthday of his father, missed 3 years running. Marcus's voice on the phone said, Dad. Walter said, Marcus. Hang on. He turned the page. Sarah. Sarah looked up from where she was leaning against the wall. Walter said, Sarah. Visit 68. 2-hour drive each way. Groceries every visit. Fixed the porch rail. Painted the back door. Replaced the gasket on the kitchen sink. Brought the children 11 times. Called every Sunday. Asked if I'd eaten. Asked if I was sleeping. Asked about my back. Sarah's eyes had filled up. She didn't make a sound. Walter closed the notebook. He looked up at the room. He said, I want you to understand something. Every one of those entries I wrote in the dark. After you'd left. After we'd hung up. 3 years of it. Right there in that book. He looked at Prude. He said, you can put your petition away. There won't be a guardianship. Henry has an updated will in the other folder. Your clients are going to want to read it before they decide what to do next. Prude opened his mouth. He closed it. He sat back. Henry slid the new will across the table. Daniel and Karen leaned over it together. Marcus on the phone said, read it to me. Somebody read it to me. Karen read it out loud. The ranch, every acre, every building, every head of cattle went to Sarah. The trust, the $4.1 million, went into a fund for Sarah's 2 children. Walter's only grandchildren. The only grandchildren who had ever set foot on the property. The savings, Walter's $600,000, went to a scholarship in Mary's name at the rural school where Sarah taught. To Daniel, $1. And a letter. To Karen, $1. And a letter. To Marcus, $1. And a letter. That was the will. The room went very quiet. Daniel found his voice first. "Dad, you can't do this. You can't punish us for trying to take care of you." Walter said, "Daniel, look at me. I'm 78 years old. I'm not feeble. I'm not lost. I haven't slipped a single day since your mother died. You weren't trying to take care of me. You were trying to take care of yourselves with what you thought was left of me." Corinne was crying now. The real kind. The kind without the quiver in it. She said, "Daddy, we didn't know. If we'd known." Walter said, "Corinne, that's the whole point. That's the whole thing. You didn't know. And how you behaved when you didn't know, that was the only thing I ever needed to find out." Marcus on the phone said, "Mom would be ashamed of you." That was when Walter stopped. He looked at Sarah. He looked at Henry. He took a breath. He said, "Marcus, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Your mother is not ashamed of me." He went to the desk drawer. He pulled out an envelope. The paper was old. The handwriting on the front was Mary's. He said, "Your mother wrote this 6 weeks before she died. She made me promise to read it after she was gone. She made me promise not to read it sooner. I read it the night of her funeral in this kitchen, alone." He opened it. He didn't read all of it. He read 3 lines. "Walter, don't tell them anything yet. Watch them first. We raised 4 children. You and I both know there is at least one of them we got wrong. Find out before you give them the keys to anything." He put the letter down. He said, "This wasn't my idea. This was your mother's. I just had the patience to do what she asked." The room didn't have anything to say to that. Prude stood up first. He put his pen back in his pocket. He picked up his briefcase. He looked at Daniel and said, "Mr. Briggs, you and your siblings have a lot to talk about. There won't be a petition. I'll send you my final invoice." He walked out. The screen door slapped behind him. Marcus's voice on the phone said, "I want to come out there." "Dad, let me come out." Walter said, "Marcus, not today. Maybe not for a while." He hung up the phone. Daniel stood up. He looked at his father. He started to say something. He stopped. He started again. He stopped again. Finally he said, "I'm sorry." Walter said, "Daniel, I know you are. You're sorry it didn't go the way you planned." Daniel didn't argue. He couldn't. He picked up his keys. He left. Corinne stayed at the table for a minute longer. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. She looked at Sarah. She said, "I'm not going to ask you to forgive me. I just want to say I'm sorry to you." Sarah said, "I know." Corinne left. The dust took a while to settle on the drive that day. But it did settle. Henry stayed for another hour. He had Walter sign 2 more documents, just to make everything iron tight in case any of the 3 tried something later. Then he packed up his briefcases and stood at the door. He said, "Walter, you did what Mary asked." Walter said, "I did." Henry said she'd be proud. Walter nodded. He couldn't quite get a word out for that one. Henry left. That night, Sarah sat with her father at the kitchen table. The dishes were done. The house was quiet. She said, "Daddy, I don't want any of this. The ranch. The money. None of it." Walter said, "I know you don't." She said, "I just want you. That's all I ever wanted." Walter said, "Sarah, honey, listen to me. That's exactly why it goes to you. If you wanted it, I wouldn't give it to you. I'm giving it to you because you don't." She started to cry. He reached over and took her hand the way he'd taken it on the porch swing the night before. He said, "Your mother saw it years ago. She knew which one of you was going to be the one. She made me promise to find out for myself. I made her that promise. And now I've kept it." Sarah cried for a while. Walter just sat with her. He didn't try to fix anything. He just held her hand. After a while, she got up. She rinsed her face at the sink. She came back. They sat there until almost 1 in the morning. Talking. Not talking. Just being in the kitchen, both of them, the way they used to before any of this started. Now here's what happened next. Sarah moved out to the ranch 6 months later. She gave up her teaching job in town and took a position at the rural school where the Mary Briggs Scholarship had just been announced. She brought her 2 children. Walter taught them how to ride. He taught them how to feed the horses. He taught them how to mend a fence the way his own father had taught him. The ranch came alive again. There were boots by the door that were too small. There were drawings on the fridge. There was noise in the house. Walter said he hadn't slept that well since 1972. Daniel didn't come back. He hired a lawyer in Denver to look at contesting the will. The lawyer read it once and told him there wasn't a single thing he could do. Henry had built it like a fortress. Corinne called once, 6 months after that day, on Walter's birthday. She left a voicemail. She said happy birthday, and she said she loved him. Walter listened to it twice. He didn't call her back. Not yet. Marcus stopped sending Christmas cards. Walter didn't expect another word from him as long as he lived. He turned out to be right. The 3 of them told different stories to different people about what had happened. They said their father had lost his mind. They said the youngest sister had manipulated him. They said it was a tragedy. Walter knew the truth. So did Sarah. So did Henry. So did Mary somewhere. 2 years after that morning in the kitchen, Walter sat on the porch swing where Mary used to sit. The sun was going down. Sarah came out with 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. She sat next to him. The kids were inside, doing homework, fighting over the TV remote. Walter watched the last of the light come down across the back pasture. He took Mary's wedding ring out from under his shirt. He'd worn it on a chain around his neck since the day she died. He looked at it for a long time. He said out loud, "I did it, Mary. I did what you said." Sarah heard him. She didn't say anything. She just put her head on his shoulder. The porch swing creaked. The crickets started up. The kids' voices came out through the kitchen window. And the man who had once stood in that same kitchen, shaking, with one hand pressed to his chest and a torn envelope on the counter, just sat there and let himself rest. For the first time in 3 years. He let himself rest.